Thanks so much for coming back and visiting us for episode two. We actually made it to an episode two. Really excited to have Jen Grace Barron joining us today from InspireCorps. Welcome, Jen.
Thanks, Pete. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So, Jen is a friend, a colleague, a client, and someone that we partner with very often. So there's a whole lot of stuff here, which I think gets down to some of the things that we're going to talk about today, which is this idea of the future of business and leadership. And leadership, quite frankly, one of the words that means everything and nothing all at once, right? So
there are lots of ways to define it, indeed.
yes, absolutely. And I think what we're going to talk about today is the really quirky way that you and your team at InspireCorps think about it. So first and foremost, your title, CEO and Chief Inspiration Officer, right? Co-founder, get it right?
Yes.
What does that all mean? What's InspireCorps? Tell the audience, because everyone's really excited to talk to you. I had a bunch of emails coming in when people knew that I was doing one on leadership, and they're like, "What type of leadership? What is inspiration leadership?" So you're no pressure, but everyone really wants to talk to you today. So
That's fantastic. That's music to my ears. I love it. I love what we do. So what we do is we help companies grow from the inside out through their people, and we do this through strategies and through implementation both. Something that you and I have talked about in the past is we really pride ourselves on bringing human qualities and humanities back into organizations. So really grounding in what people need most, what thriving humans need most in order to thrive in their work.
awesome. So there's obviously a lot of really big consultancies and experts. I know you and your team. Tell us a little bit about the makeup of the co-founders here. And I know many of you have roots back to Yale and just sort of a lot of experts. So can you just tell us a little bit about InspireCorps before we get right into just this deep, vast topic that we can talk for hours on in terms of leadership?
Yeah, this is probably important because I could super geek out on research, and we care as much about applying the research as we do the research. But our team is really this ambidextrous organization of academics. So we really pride ourselves on grounding everything we do in social science, and then also applied practitioners. So a lot of folks who've had C-level line leadership experience and know how to take the research and really get the most value from it when we apply it. So
That's awesome.
yeah.
So with so many books, so many great books on leadership, I know you and I have geeked out a bunch. We're both avid readers, and we'll definitely share some with the audience in a little bit. But I think the thing I want to understand is you had this really successful Silicon Valley career, right? Connecticut, for many reasons. You came back to us, and we're excited to have you here in district, in drive, really building InspireCorps and the team. Why start a company on leadership when there's, we've got some of the biggest consultancies in the world that have 1,000+ person teams dedicated on this topic? What is it that InspireCorps and you believe is missing from these really robust curriculums that I know you're doing differently, but I just really want the audience to understand it because it blew my mind, guys. And I just think that when Jen tells you a little bit about it, it'll blow your mind too.
Thanks, Pete. So I would say that there are two things. That the world of work, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but when my career started in Silicon Valley, it was late 90s. And the world of work has changed radically in the last 20 years. And that's really exciting to me. I seek change and love innovating. And it's also pretty hard to keep up, even on people strategy and human resources and the evolution. And so 5 years ago, we actually really believed that you're right. There are large consulting firms that provide robust curriculum, but we think about that as pretty off the shelf. And what we really want to support and understand more is what are the customized, more high touch solutions that can be provided that are not off the shelf, but are really tailored to the most pressing priorities and the biggest opportunities
That's
for
awesome.
organizations. Yeah.
Now, when I think about you talk about the past a little bit, I'm really glad you took us back sort of pre-dot-com bubble and in that way, and that's great. Tell me about, I personally believe from what I've seen, what our clients have seen, that leadership and sort of human people development was a lot less complex, back then. From your perspective, what's been that radical shift, that radical change that you're seeing happen from just how organizations have to think about and respond to people and leadership? Help us understand that and unpack that for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on the phone with someone this morning, and he was really frustrated with his highest level board in his company, and he mentioned, either they're not telling me something. This was his rationale for what was going on. Right, they're holding something back, or they're wildly incompetent. And I pushed him and introduced a third option, right? That actually the complexity of what's happening in the situation that they're in has in some ways paralyzed their leadership and decision making capability. We actually see this happening a lot with, the
Really?
one of the most frustrating points that we see in organizations is decision making capability.
Really?
And yes. And so we attribute that to the changing conditions, the changing pace, changes in technology, lots and lots of disruption, and really having to navigate more uncertainty and assume more risk. And it's really tough at decision making levels at that.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is this idea of like trust in the blame game, right?
Mm,
And the echo chamber that is social media, the echo chamber that is technology, and just rapid response. We're always so accessible by these phones, by these emails, and everything. Um, is trust and blame the sort of two things that you're sort of seeing come up a lot on a lot of these phone calls, like you have every day?
yes. I mean, I would say more so the lack of trust,
Okay.
right? I mean, yes, certainly it digresses to blame in some situations, but the interconnectivity makes trust that much more essential.
Really?
The constant feedback mechanisms that technology affords means you actually have to manage those feedback mechanisms in a way that's productive.
Right.
So it takes a more active it requires more active leadership
Right.
in managing that technology, using that technology.
One of the things I thought was really interesting is just the, we have a design consultancy, right? And when you were doing some leadership work with our team, one of the things that you and one of your co-founders, Allison, was sort of taking us through is this idea of 3D leadership.
Mm,
And obviously, as a former gamer and just lover of all things sci-fi, when you said 3D leadership, a lot of the other words you were saying, admittedly, I was glazing over until I had my coffee. But when you said 3D leadership, it really kind of perked me up. So, what is 3D leadership, and how does that intersect with inspiration and what InspireCorps delivers?
yeah. So the way that we think about 3D leadership is that leadership is a full contact sport. That your impact and your ability to influence as a leader actually happens through your body language, your comportment. It happens through your emotions and what you emote. And then it also happens through your cognition, your mindset, your framing on the world, and the language that you use to bring meaning. So all of our programs incorporate all three dimensions, both because it's faster to train leaders in 3D, right? It's stickier, you're able to integrate it more quickly, but also because leaders need all three dimensions. They need self-awareness in all three dimensions in order to be their best. And that's missing in most leader development programs. The original idea for this came to me when I was training MD, PhD scientists
Wow.
about 15 years ago at Johnson and Johnson. And frankly, I became
Well, just
really,
genius.
really impatient. Really impatient when some of the concepts that we were introducing cognitively, right? These are super smart people, right?
Yeah.
Huge horsepower in the brain. And it was just taking way too long, and it was really frustrating. So we started incorporating some edgier, really innovative methods and learning curriculum that incorporated more 3D. That's where Allison's expertise came in. So you were asking about our history. Allison Holzer was one of the early pioneers in emotional intelligence, and so a lot of our curriculum is grounded in that. And Sandy Spataro, an amazing scholar in organizational behavior, and so we're really committed to integrating and innovating in 3D.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think the two things that stood out to me, I think, is just having worked with you, and just the more I've studied leadership, the more I realize that everybody talks about leadership as a soft skill, right? And it's, in my opinion, it's one of the hardest things to build, right? So,
Mm.
why do you think that they call it a soft skill, and why do you think it's so damn hard?
Really good questions. Those are tough ones. So
I didn't
yeah,
write that one down. Right?
yeah, that was good. Um, I think we've called it a soft skill because it's not something that we've trained in business. So it's kind of something that I think people have fooled themselves into thinking isn't as important. Um, we often hear we work with folks in the MBA program at the School of Management here in town, and it's between 5 and 10 years, we often get emails back saying, "Wow, I really am getting the value from what you taught us 5, 10 years ago." So right away they're using their technical kind of classical training, the finance side, and then as they grow in the organization, as they rise in terms of leadership, they really see the value of
Right.
that training.
So it sounds like, if I'm sort of interpreting it correctly, your programs are a little bit more experiential in that it's almost like time release knowledge, right? So you're sort of planting those seeds,
Mm.
developing those sort of leadership muscles, dare I say. Um, what is it about the experiential curriculum that you guys have that you think, we talked a lot about on the last episode with Albert on future of education. Um, we spoke a lot about this idea of education was always done the following way, past, present. And one of the things that came up quite a bit was this idea of experiential learning. So how we learn and how we behave, obviously those are two critically important things in leadership, right? So how do we start to look at, and how can the audience start to look at this idea of 3D leadership that they can start to sort of a go out and just learn more about, where they can learn more about it, and then b start to embed those things into themselves so over time they can become a better leader.
Yep. So I would say that a good place to start thinking about 3D leadership is, starting with basics around emotional intelligence, right? Lots of good resources out there. Um, one of the pieces of work that we use a lot, and one of the contributors that really led the field in somatic intelligence and um, somatic learning, is Richard Strozzi Heckler. So we love his work. Um, and cognitive, I mean, that's a little more straightforward, but that's a place to start. But really it's and the model that we use often, foundationally at InspireCorps, is situational leadership. And
Okay.
that's a literature that's been around for quite some time, about 50 years. And so it essentially says that inspiring leadership, great leadership, depends on the situation. And so to have self-awareness is really the starting place. And then who are the players, and what's the outcome that you're hoping to produce, and how do you align those three pieces to be most impactful, or have highest impact.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I think it was emotional intelligence 2.0, that book.
Mm.
Love that book. We work with a lot of tech companies. You work and have worked with a lot of tech companies. I mentioned Silicon Valley before. um, what is it about tech companies that tend to lack some of these core tenets of leadership? We certainly see many things on the news today, whether it be with Amazon or Google or Facebook or the other sort of big tech companies. I feel like they get a lot of pressure as it comes to leadership or lack thereof in tech companies. And I know you work with a lot of big tech companies. Why does that come up so often? Why is leadership lacking so much in areas of these tech geniuses?
I actually think tech companies have come a long way. I mean, I think that they are realizing the value in starting to train leaders earlier in their career, right? The time value of starting early.
Right.
Um, but I actually would say that you know we all, as humans, tend to gravitate toward what we're good at and what we've been trained to do. And
Right.
so whether it's tech, or we have a really strong practice in healthcare, those are classically trained docs.
Right.
And so it isn't natural for them to move toward how to resolve conflict, or how
Right.
to align decision making, or how to set clear goals and expectations and hold people accountable. Those are not things, even in business school, that they're really trained to do
Really?
very well. They might be trained conceptually, but that's really different than applying it on an ongoing basis.
So it sounds like what you're sort of getting towards is the idea of practitioners ultimately are pushing towards practice mastery in their particular craft, but leadership is not something that's being largely practiced or considered in the modalities that they're delivering. Would you say that's fairly accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know there are few companies that take this on as a foundational, sustainable way of growth. There are companies that do, but it is um, not as common as we'd like it to be.
That's interesting. You know, obviously, technology to me is something that we're really passionate about. I'm really passionate about. How would you say that for companies that are doing a pretty good job at leadership development? I'm going to
Mhm.
come back to the flip side of it, obviously, in a bit, but just to sort of get the juices flowing in both our minds
Yeah.
and the audience's mind is how would you say that with this remote economy and um, the workforce that they're talking about completely being changed by 2020, 2025, how do we develop 3D leadership when so much communication, so
Mm-hmm.
much interaction now is happening in these digital channels, platforms
Mm-hmm.
like Slack and
Mm-hmm.
Facebook at work. I think I always the name always escapes me. How do we develop and practice 3D leadership when we're not face to face?
Yeah. So we're still figuring this out, right? I mean, this is pretty hot off the presses in terms of
Sure.
inspiring and managing geographic, you know, remote and disparate locations. But here's what we know for sure: that there are cadences of live to remote that we know are proving to work.
Okay. Tell me about some of
And
those.
well, so when you're launching a new project, there is good research that shows that a live launch is very much worth the investment.
Okay.
Like bringing people together live, and you'd be surprised. There are multi-million-dollar projects that are being launched live. That investment, that design, isn't happening, and it goes a long way. I mean, Pete, we're animals. Like
Right.
we actually have needs for trust, and needs for connection, and needs for sameness, um, that don't happen when we're connecting across technology initially.
Right.
So like that's just an example
Yeah,
of
that makes total sense. So I think what I'm sort of hearing you say is the importance of even for remote companies or remote workers and employees being able to find that human community, being
mm,
able to get that sense of belonging is key to developing themselves as leaders and as the workforce. Is that sort of
yeah, and something that we train in leaders is the idea of pulse, right? To actually have a pulse
uh-huh,
on how strong is the connection that you have with your people, how strong is the connection that exists across a team. So one of a leader's most important roles is to be aware of that pulse, and then to manage that pulse, right? So if you start to sense that the pulse is getting faint,
right.
you actually take action. You get crafty. You get wily about how you can produce that additional connection or address it.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So talk to me about just as a leader myself, having teams that are, we have a remote policy in our organization, having teams that are in person and remote. What are some things that me and the audience can try, just even just tactically or pragmatically,
Mm.
that can help to a gauge and measure this pulse, but then also to sort of stoke the fire and keep it burning
Yeah.
in these situations where we're dealing with multiple time zones or in-person digital telepresence type things. Just some thoughts or ideas that you guys are flirting with and playing with. I know you guys have a really awesome culture of sort of test and learn internally,
Mm.
which I've experienced firsthand, and it's pretty awesome. So talk to me about just how might I go about doing that with the pulse.
Yeah. So, something that one of the ways that we think about the future of leadership is that you're really managing aspiration versus managing performance, right? And so, um, we have a tool that's called the 4321 tool that helps leaders to guide conversations that could be as short as 2 minutes, or they could be as long as a full 1 hour check in,
Wow.
but it's the same framework. And it's a framework that's evidence based on how to have these really productive, really connected conversations, even in a really short period of time. And I'll give you a sneak peek that the piece that's usually missing in conversations, because we're moving so fast and because we're orienting to our technical craft, is the first piece of these conversations, which we call the good news or what's going right. And so when you tee off a conversation with even 60 seconds of catching someone doing something fantastic versus just jumping right into the tactics or the updates on production, um, it has the opportunity to really shift the conversation in powerful ways, whether you're live or remote. It has the opportunity to build that connective tissue very quickly right out of the gate, so that the rest of the conversation can even be more
That's awesome. I love that. I mean, obviously
productive.
Slack has screen sharing, video sharing. We use Zoom quite a bit, so that's awesome. I feel like that's something that a technique can be applied. One thing I want to open up is, there's always you know, I've heard it referred to in corporate environments as like the shit sandwich, which is like I'm going to open up with open up with positive,
Yeah.
kind of wedge the bad
Yeah.
stuff in the middle, and then end with positive. Right? I'm
Yeah.
sure you've heard the term
Yeah.
and many things like it. What these guys are laughing as we're holding camera. What I think is what I've experienced personally, having worked with you guys, is it's it's the human way of actually caring
Mm.
that makes the difference between how to open with hard news or good news or whatever the order is. I find that it's the human thing that's really lacking in a lot of these really strong, institutional programs. I've had the pleasure of working with some of the greatest consultancies on the planet, and those of which will not be named. And oftentimes the sterileness
Mm.
of the process and the rigor around that sort of takes that human essence out. So talk to me about in one of those 2 minute or 1 hour types of dialogues. And I'm not suggesting we role play here, but if you were talking to me as a employee, and you were my boss, and I wasn't performing at the level that you wanted me to perform, how might you or I, as a leader, go
Mm.
about trying that 2 minute framework, whether it
Yeah.
be in person or over a Zoom conference call?
Yeah. So I'm going to back us up, because regardless of what I tell you about the 2 minute framework, it will not work if a foundation of trust isn't present. So
Awesome.
so that takes a lot more work than 2 minutes of good news.
Great.
And we have a deep curriculum on how to manage your brand and trust as a leader, right?
Awesome.
So the experience that others have of you as a leader. Let's assume that you're managing that actively. Then, I mean, I'll give you an example. I was late for a meeting, ran into some traffic, an internal meeting with my team last week, and I kind of came running in, hair on fire, and I was very, very apologetic. And we sat down, and we knew we had a lot to cover. We started kind of drilling in on all of the tactics. All of us immediately kind of had this sensation in our bodies that something was missing,
Right.
and we couldn't go forward with the conversation. We all knew what it was. We were actually missing the 2 minute good news kind of grounding.
Right.
So I kind of called an audible and said, back it up. Like I need 30 seconds of something you're really proud of having observed, witnessed, or created this week. Like, so it can sound and look like anything, but once you start training it, you start to notice when it's really missing and the difference it makes, what it infuses into a conversation early on.
Absolutely.
But back to the shit sandwich. So it will be a shit sandwich if someone doesn't believe that you have their back,
Right.
in an ongoing and drumbeat sort of way. And so we think about trust as like a marble jar. This is an analogy that comes from Brene Brown's work,
Yeah.
which we're certified in.
Yeah.
And it comes from, like, they do this in kids' classrooms, right? So
Sand
when
marbles.
something good happens in the classroom, you get to, people get to add marbles, and so the class is always looking at that level of trust from people being nice and doing good things, and then missteps happening and trust being broken. And so, we that feeds in with the pulse, right? So the pulse is, it's not just connection, it's meaningful connection.
Right.
How much are we feeling like we're on each other's team is really what we're getting at. How much are we remembering each other, and that what we're trying to create requires both of us or all of us, not just what I'm doing.
Right. No, that's super. It makes total sense. And I think, what I'm hearing and seeing, and obviously this is what you do, and you're damn good at it. Is really it's in and around foundations of trust are built through consistent, persistent behavior, right?
Yes,
And the
that's right.
shift of that behavior,
That's right. And
um,
predictable.
and predictable behavior, right?
Yes.
So, you know,
And mood management
right.
too.
So
Trust.
your team had a lot of trust for you. They saw that you were obviously frazzled, whether it was personal or professional, whatever it is. They cared enough to give you the space to let you make the audible.
They
But
did.
if it was okay, Jen's gonna be late all the time, then they sort of start to learn that Jen's gonna be late all the time, or Jen's gonna be moody all the time.
That's right.
So I guess the question that makes a really good question, which is, we talk about technology a lot. I feel like nowadays we have the many masks that we wear on social media or behind the scenes, and nowadays employers and employees being connected on Instagram or Snapchat, these types of things, right? And how we behave or act in a work setting or a personal setting might be one and the same. They might be different, right? So a lot of times everyone's tuning in all the time, right?
Yeah,
Like
they
just like
are.
this video right here, help me understand what we see happening a lot. I mean, obviously there's a lot of movements happening right now, and we're not going to go political in this conversation, because God knows that that's just not my thing. But um, what I see happening a lot is it takes so much to build trust,
Mm.
and a tweet can explode that trust, right? So much to build a relationship, and a moment, a meeting can explode that.
Mm.
So, as humans, knowing that we are flawed, knowing that we make these types of mistakes, how might we, as future leaders that are watching this, when we make that mistake, how do we recover from it?
Yes.
Start with that. And then I have a follow up to that. But I don't want to bombard you with too many questions at once.
Yeah. So I love everything that you're saying. I actually love that we've moved into this world, because I think who we are as leaders is who we are at home. It's who we are at work. Um, I have believed this for a very long time. When we used to try to compartmentalize it, actually, a lot of people still do try to compartmentalize it, like who I am at work is different than who I am at home. Actually, it's not. You may think of yourself differently. You may try to act differently, but you are one person who is, shifting gears or shifting lenses. Um, and that takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of labor, psychologically. So
Absolutely.
we push leaders to integrate as much as possible. We know that leaders tend to hold back on sharing more of themselves or being more transparent, and usually their team wants to know more. We know that leaders hold back on increasing expectations of their team. So, the highest performing leaders in organizations often get 360 feedback that says they could expect more from me, right?
Right.
And when you ask
Interesting.
leaders, why aren't you expecting more from them? They'll say, well, I thought I was asking enough, or I'm already asking a lot. But
Yeah,
people
it's
want to be
surprising.
challenged. They want to be in it with that person. They want to know that person. They want to have an opportunity to fail. They want to, right? And
Sure.
so, where were we with that? Let's see, where did we start? Um,
I think we were
Personal, professional,
Yeah.
whole leadership.
just being
The
able to
real
always
deal.
be tuned in. I think the thing I was really trying to
What do you
pick
do?
your brain on
How do you
is how do you
recover?
recover at that point? Because it's so easy to be working so hard for so long to build something,
Yeah,
and then just a mistake or a misshift, or even sometimes just a perception shift.
yeah,
I mean, I think it's so easy now. As humans, we always think that everything's about us, right? Not everyone's meditating and sitting on a cushion every day, right? So I think as leaders, it's really easy to think that everything's about us or not about us, or things are happening to me.
mm.
When these things are happening in organizations, what are some ways where the leaders can recover from those moments?
Yeah. So when we work with a team, one of the first experiences we do to get to know them is we ask them to think about a leader that has inspired them in their career. And we do this to help illustrate our model because what comes forward is what we know
Right.
inspires. It is inspiring leadership, and how that works and what it looks like. And I mean, we've done this hundreds of times. One of the things that always comes up is that this leader was fallible.
Mm,
They admitted when they made mistakes or when they didn't know something.
yeah.
We knew that they needed
Right.
us, right? So
Right.
they showed transparency with what they didn't know instead of pretending they knew everything. They asked for help when they needed it. They showed some vulnerability, which we have completely backwards in organizations. We tend to want to kind of show this tough side and
Sure.
not be needed and manage our impression, that we have everything under control. And what really inspires followership is when people know that they're needed and you are specific about utilizing them and activating them across the team. So I would say if you've made a misstep, fastest, clearest way to bounce, to actually recover from that is to admit it and to speak about how what you've learned, and just to ask for help if you need it.
So I mean, that's a great segue into just where I want to go next, which is this idea of culture, right?
Mm.
So culture defined so differently by so many people. I mean, I'm some of the hodgepodge compiled versions of what I think is culture. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is just shared language, shared behavior, shared understanding, right? In
Mhm.
an organization, I think is how I would define culture. I'd love to hear if you sort of agree with that, disagree with that as a definition.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's the water that you're swimming in. It's everything from how people behave, especially when no one's watching,
Right.
to the decisions that you make about systems and structure. I mean, that's a big part. That's like the hardwiring of culture.
Sure.
A performance management system, for example,
Right.
how you guide those conversations. We've worked with a lot of companies that have basically thrown their performance management system out the window, and
When you say
worked
system, you mean process, or you mean like a technology?
both.
Okay.
Um,
Tell me more about that.
well, I mean, some of the largest companies in the world with several 100,000 employees have shifted away from a more formal process
Really?
once a year or annually or every 6 months to a more ongoing conversation where you're managing aspiration, you're managing motivation versus just managing production,
Interesting.
for many many reasons, but the maybe um, the lead reason is that the research showed that it actually isn't accomplishing what we'd hoped it was going to accomplish in terms of motivation, in terms of
Interesting.
productivity.
I think it's so interesting. I mean, we talked about this a little bit, before the chat was this idea of, how the Industrial Revolution moved us from the factory to, knowledge workers.
Yeah.
We are no longer manufacturing is being displaced by artificial and augmented intelligence, automation, machines, robotics.
Right.
Technology has essentially changed the way that we work, right? So, what I'm hearing you say now is, in terms of how to manage that, throwing out some of these, over cumbersome technologies or systems has created some new ways and some new challenges for these large companies in terms of how they manage their people. What do you believe is the biggest shift between the factory worker and the knowledge worker today that is contributing towards these people throwing out these probably very expensive systems to implement, train, and roll out, right?
Hmm.
So why are they trashing them?
Yeah, because they're not working. I think first and foremost, it's hundreds of thousands of hours of misused time, and
Wow.
not by
Hundreds of thousands of hours of misused time.
in performance management, right? So if you think about it, you've got 100,000 employees, right? And it maybe takes on average 5 hours per employee when you think about them thinking about their performance over the
Sure.
course of a year, their leader thinking about It's a lot of time. It's a lot of wasted time.
So stop
And it's
wasting
not
time. Yeah,
producing the motivation that it was intended to produce. Yeah, back in, manufacturing eras, giving people feedback about how many things they counted or how many things they
sure.
assembled, that was motivating potentially. So, that is just, it's gone. Now people have choices. They have choices about their career. They have choices about working elsewhere. They have choices about, one of the trends that I think is most interesting is that, people who are graduating from school, from college now, they don't necessarily aspire to owning a home. That's just a whole different world,
Sure.
right? So if they don't aspire to owning a home, how does their entire schema for
Right.
what life looks like, what work looks like, what compensation looks like, what their, the flexibility that they desire, etc. So it's pretty big changes.
Yeah, pretty big changes. And I think, clearly 30 minutes is not nearly enough to get inside Jen's mind, inside Jen's brain. We could probably do a whole hour on schema just in itself, right? I think for me, other than just saying thank you for just your time and how limited it is and how you're going from thing to thing and plane to plane, what I think is really, really the thing I want the audience to take away from this is that you are not managing people in the traditional sense of the way you're managing people. You are managing their aspirations. I think if there's one thing we can all take as an immediate sort of check on our own pulse
Mm.
is, what are the questions that we're asking and what are the things that motivate us? What are the aspirations? And, it's managing that journey, it's managing that path that ultimately I feel is what you're saying the future of leadership is all about. So before I let you go back to your busy schedule today, how does the audience sort of look more up on you? Where can I get more information about 3D leadership in the team at InspireCorps?
Yeah, there's some great stuff written on our website and blogs.
Which is what?
Our website is InspireCorps, like the Peace Corps, CORPS.com.
Awesome.
We have a book coming out soon on the future of organizations and leadership through inspiration, called Inspire.
Inspire.
We believe it is a leader's first job to inspire themselves, as Pete just said, and that inspiration is a most important resource to be managed in organizations.
Awesome.
So that's coming soon.
When can we expect that? Any?
We are deciding on a publisher right now, so probably fall of 2019. But lots of writing on it in our blogs already. So
Can I convince you to come back here to District and
I
Drive and tell us about it?
would be honored. I would
Awesome.
be honored anytime.
Awesome. Well, we talked about a lot today. Again, I can't wait to hit the publish button on this. So thank you so much. Before I let you go, is there anything that I didn't talk about or ask about specific to the future of leadership and business leadership that you just burning to kind of speak on?
I think I mean, what's most exciting to me is it's a whole new world to be created, right? So there's more that we don't know about how organizations are going to look and what's going to be needed in the future than we know, and that's the exciting part. Is through people analytics, through experimenting and taking risks. I would really urge people who are in decision making roles who have that authority to build things and take risks, change things, try things. People are hungry for new ways of working in the world, and that's only going to happen through courageous people saying, let's do it a little bit differently.
Yeah,
So,
I think for everybody watching too, whether you're in a leadership position or not, I mean, what I'm hearing is that authenticity and transparency, being able to ask your employer for more, being
mm,
able to ask your teams for more, and really just shaking up the status quo is really one of the big things that you guys do. So I think, one of the things I'm looking forward to doing is trying to shake some of those things up after this discussion. So
we're ready to
thanks so much,
help.
Jen. We
Woo!
appreciate it.
All right.